Hello and welcome to the next in the series of IPAF webinars. Today's webinar will focus on the latest IPAF Global Safety Report. I am Brian Parker, IPAF's Head of Safety and Technical, and it's my pleasure today to be your host and presenter and be with the panelists a little bit later on. We've got over 391 people registered today from over 45 countries. What a fantastic achievement. So thank you to you all for joining us today. So good morning, good afternoon or good evening from wherever you are in the world, and thank you again for joining us. I would like to say a huge thank you to our exclusive sponsor for this webinar, which is Xenoboom. Certainly without our sponsor support, we wouldn't be able to run these webinars, so thank you very much. Now, just a little bit of housekeeping for you all today. The webinar is live with translations into Italian, Spanish, German, should I say, French, Portuguese, Dutch, and Chinese. There are a couple of live polls that we are conducting today, one which you will have already seen, and I'd be really interested to know if you've read the previous report, and we will ask you a final poll at the end of the webinar, so please do get involved with that. This webinar is also, as you've seen, being recorded and will be on the IPAF website and YouTube channel in the next few days, so be sure to log on there and be able to share that around your teams and your networks. And also it's a great place for you to go back on and find older webinars and also look for future webinars that IPAF are going to be running. Now we will, subject to time, have a question and answer session a little bit later on. Well, I will put any questions which you submit to our panel of expert speakers. So you can see there, you can ask them some questions now, and we will look to cover them a little bit later on. Okay, so now we'll watch a short film from our exclusive sponsor, Xenoboom.
Hello, I'm Julie Houston-Smith, the UK and Ireland Regional Manager for Xenoboom. Today, I've been asked to show you some of the safety features and benefits of the Xenoboom battery scissor product range. This is the Xenoboom 1930S, 19-foot, 6-metre platform height hydraulic scissor platform, which is powered by 4 6-volt batteries situated in a lockable tray in the machine base. Locks are on both the cabinets at each side of the machine and are particularly useful to keep your battery pack safe and secure. In here, we have a set of maintenance-free sealed batteries, charged via an onboard battery-specific charger. Of course, it's possible to use different types of batteries in the Xenoboom product range. To do so, simply reprogram the charger to suit the type of batteries fitted. Another clever feature of the Xenoboom battery scissor product range is the transport protection bumper strip. This not only protects the paint finish, but also the decals from being scraped, damaged, and becoming illegible. And speaking of decals, let me show you this one, the QR code. Scan the QR code safety decal with your smartphone and gain access to the operator's manual, parts manual, service manual, and the CE certificate of conformity. Also, a useful change of ownership form, which may be completed should your Xenoboom be moving to a new owner. Situated at the back of the machine, beside the emergency lowering handle, is the brake release system. This is particularly useful if the machine has been left completely discharged and needs moved out of the work area. The main platform and extension deck is anti-slip. Let me show you something clever about the control box. It doesn't matter if you're left or right-handed, the Xenoboom control box is designed to be fitted to either side of the deck. The cover on the control box prevents it from water ingress, dirt, and paint overspray, and it's easily removable. With a robust yet smooth slide-out extension deck and guardrails designed to fold down quickly and easily on all models, the Xenoboom battery scissor range has a host of well thought out safety features and benefits. Thanks for listening.
Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen okay now. Thank you to Xenoboom and certainly for Julie there for that look into the product range there. So just to go through the agenda, we're going to discuss why we report accidents and incidents. We're then going to look at some of the data, the historical data from the 2016 and 2018 report, but only very briefly. And incidentally, the poll indicated earlier that only 25% of the people watching the webinar today had actually read that report. So hopefully going forward, we can get some more people reading this report, the next report, and understand why these incidents are happening. Then the focus of the webinar is then going to be looking at the 1920 statistics and data. That will take me up to the point there where we're going to have the round table discussion. And the panel of which we have today will discuss the findings, examine trends, and touch on the culture and approach of capturing and reporting accidents and incidents. I will then summarise, and then we will then finish that with a Q&A session, taking into account some of your questions that you have submitted. So I often get asked, why do we report accidents? And, is it something that we need to do? And I suppose and hope that you will actually report these incidents and accidents in your own, your own businesses. I get asked, would it make any difference in the wider picture? It was only one accident. Well, the answer is yes. The aims and objectives of accident reporting are quite simple. From us as an industry, IPAF need to learn from the incidents. We need to share these learning outcomes. And hopefully by doing this, all of us make the use of powered access even safer than what it already is. Providing your accidents, your incidents to IPAF helps us to help you by preparing guidance, formulating safety campaigns, looking at the various advice and information, and naturally giving information to our industry and our members. Please remember that all data and all incidents, actions that are reported to IPAF are anonymised and confidential and 100% secure. So be confident that your incident data is not going to be used or shared anywhere else. So if we look at now the 2016 to 2018 fatal statistics, in those 3 years, sadly, 224 people died. So on average, there were 75 people killed in mutes each year for this period. Now, the top 6, which you can see on the left there, accounted for 206 of those fatalities. Sad news, and sure, there's a lot of work that we need to do to improve that. Now, I suppose we can all agree that 75 fatals per year is an unacceptable number of deaths. And for sure, work must never stop to reduce this globally. However, and we need to put this into context, it is estimated that there are approximately 1.5 million mutes in hire fleets globally. So that's a lot of equipment out there used every day safely to lift people up safe, to provide them with temporary work at height. The average daily utilisation of powered access is thought to be around 75%. This would indicate then, taking into account the hire fleet globally, that on average there is 1 fatal incident for every 3 million hire days. So we, again, taking that into context and hope to give you some sort of information there. You can see on the slide some of the trends there, and of course you can see the top 6 fatals. Moving on to the 2019/20 fatal statistics. In the last 2 years, 173 people were reported killed, which on average indicates 87 people per year. So a slight increase there of around about 16%. These reports were reported to the IPAF portal from 19 different countries around the globe. And the top 6 account for 142 of the fatalities. For the sharp-eyed amongst you, you will note that electrocutions has now become the #1 cause of fatalities in mutes. Previously, it was falls from the platform. And again, you can see some trends there. You can also see that in the 2020 data, it's trending downwards, and hopefully, we can continue to see that in 21. But you can see the totals there and the averages over the years. So just moving on from some of the reports, I'll take you through the top 6 fatals. So MUP electrocutions, there were 41 reports entered into the portal with 42 fatalities. So there was obviously a couple of incidents there, or an incident there that highlighted a double fatality. But electrocutions, it highlights, as we know, there are no second chances with electricity. And and we've really got to be careful in this industry, in this area, and raise awareness of this. Sectors, when looking at all lost time incidents, you can see that it's construction, then agricultural, are roughly equal, with electrical operations a close third. And again, when you're looking at the location of the incidents that happened, where we recorded lost time incidents, high on the agenda there for me certainly is incidents in public areas, construction sites and roads and highways. So if we take the public areas and the roads and highways together, you can see that, you know, again, working away from certain areas, perhaps where there's maybe not as much control or less supervision, we can find there are high fatal rates there. And you can see the bottom there, the typical categories that were involved in terms of electrocutions. So probably no surprises there to see that if we look at the 1B category, there are a number of fatals there. False on the platform, there were 50 reports entered with 33 fatalities. Now, to be clear, over the 5-year rolling average, this is still the most common reason for a fatality involving a mute. Again, when we look at lost time incidents, you can see construction, then rental activity, then agricultural. Again, looking at locations, you can probably no surprises see there that construction sites are there, but again, public highways, roads and highways, public areas, roads and highways, commercial premises, together account for the vast majority of these types of accidents. So certainly some information that we need to take away there and look at these sectors and these locations where these are happening. Entrapment, there were 35 reports with 32 fatalities. Entrapment in EMUP was also reported from the highest amount of countries around the globe too, with reports coming in from 12 countries. And again, when we look at the lost time incidents, you know, construction topped the chart in that sense, but then it was also facilities management and even some rental activities which involved entrapment. When looking at the location leading to an LTI, construction sites, commercial premises, and again, then public areas and roads and highways. And they account for the vast majority of these types of accidents and incidents, and sadly fatals. Also, as you can see at the configuration of the machine chart at the bottom of the slide, the most common position of the when entrapment occurred, leading to the fatal incident. And probably you can, no surprises there to see that most of them were in the elevated position, or traveling in the elevated position, and there was some in traveling in the lower position, and unfortunately some involved in the load and load. And you can see that there was some involved with maintenance. So you can see the trend lines at the top there, indicating that the elevated position is trending on the upward side. In terms of overturns, MUP overturns, there were 43 reports with 22 fatalities, and this was reported from 11 countries. When looking at all lost time incidents, the highest sector that this was prevalent in was in construction, and then machine facilities management, and then agricultural. When looking at the locations leading up to these lost time incidents, though, it was construction sites, commercial premises, and again, public areas and roads and highways. And they accounted for the vast majority of these types of accidents. So certainly some information there to look in terms of overturns. And if we take 43 reports with 22 fatalities from 11 countries, they're headline data that we need to be very much mindful of. Okay, next category that was factored in our report was mutes that had been hit by a falling object. And there were 23 reports with 8 fatalities. And these were reported from 4 countries. So I would probably say that's quite significant underreporting here. Probably like overturns, there's probably more that we maybe don't capture. But when we look at these sectors there, construction, agricultural, rental activity, and for the first time, telecommunications raised and got onto the chart. So from agricultural and construction, hit by how's the process working in terms of working and around equipment that's above us potentially. When looking at the locations, again, construction sites, and again, public areas and road and highways, again, account for the vast majority of these types of incidents. So certainly, again, food for thought from that part of it. And the first category was mutes hit by vehicle or a machine. So there were 13 reports entered into the portal with 5 fatalities from 4 countries. And when looking at all lost time incidents, construction, rental activity, again, telecommunications and facilities management. But as you can see now, the top location which led to a lost time incident or injury was in this occasion, roads and highways. So certainly if we can see, from a vehicle being struck by something, vehicles on the side of the road, even on commercial premises and that sort of things, and public areas. So no incidents there where we don't see these things when we're on the side of the road, when we're out and about in our vehicles and cars. Okay, so they're the top 6. I appreciate that's quite a whistle stop tour through them, but you will see more when you do see the report. What I now want to do is, it gives me great pleasure today to welcome Mark Keily, who's the QHSE Director for Sunbelt Rentals in the UK, Alana Paterson, who's the Head of Health and Safety and Environment for Nationwide Platforms, and Chris Wraith, Director for Access Safety Management Limited. All of these 3 people and some more are also part of the IPAF International Safety Council, and they, along with others, are also in terms of looking at the direction in terms of which way we go now in terms of safety. Okay, so now reviewed on the previous slides some of the headline data, which the IPAF Accident Work Group formerly was called, and now the International Safety Committee have approved in the new report. So I'm just going to stop sharing, and hopefully with the magic, you should now see the other speakers. Can you see are you all there, guys?
Hello, Brian.
Yep.
Hi, Brian.
Okay. Thank you. Right. Okay. So thanks for helping us today, and thanks for supporting on this. I'm just going to go through some questions. And first of all, what I'm going to start is, let's talk about the accident portal. Mark, what are the benefits to IPAF members and the industry for reporting accidents and incidents into the IPAF accident reporting portal?
Okay, thanks, Brian. From my perspective, I think, we've got a lot of data now. There's some very good data, but you can see certainly that the number of fatal accidents in comparison to the entire number of accidents is still relatively high. And I think if we can encourage more members and non-members to report accidents and incidents and near misses onto the portal, I think it's, we need to remember that that's all available as well, that we can get a much better understanding of where the key risks are in our industry and with the users as well. And by doing that, we can then help to develop training awareness campaigns that we can share across the entire world.
Thank you, Mark. Alana, have you got any other views on that? You represent a very large rental company, so appreciate taking the time.
No problem at all. Thanks, Brian. I think the only thing I'd like to add to that is the near misses and the minor incidents are really important, because they help us identify the trends and the potential serious incidents before they happen. So it doesn't matter how minor it seems, it should still be reported if it's mute related. But
don't we find that getting, incidents, minors and near misses reported is a challenge in any business? How would we encourage, anybody here listening today that, taking the time to report that is really worthwhile to us as an industry?
I think because we do find when we get the minor incidents and the near misses reported, it helps us bring down the number of serious events that we have across the industry and in any of our businesses. So being able to identify those early and put in place control measures to stop those incidents happening in the future is absolutely key to any business and to our industry.
Chris, long time that you've worked for IPAF, and you now have your own business, and but you know the challenges of getting individuals to buy into accident reporting. Where do you think we should, as an international safety committee now, push our accident reporting?
I think there's 2 sides to it, Brian. One for general rental companies and other contractors as well. There's a legal obligation to record their incidents and demonstrate that they're putting in preventative actions once incidents have happened. And so the way the IPAF portal has now been revamped and updated, that can be used as a means for recording those incidents and also analysing the data. So it's a great way as a tool as a carrot for anybody, any company, to record all their incidents on the portal, and it gives you that data, and it gives management that data at their fingertips. The other way we should be going is just encouraging everybody around the world. If you don't measure something, you can't manage it, and so the more data we can get, the better we can manage safety. So even small, as Mark and Alana have already said, the minor incidents, the near misses, the more information that we can get in that kind of vein, the more measures we can put in place, improve training, guidance around the world.
Okay, thank you. That's great. Okay, so I'm now going to talk about electrocutions, and for the first time on the report, certainly in my time of being involved with IPAF, we can now see that electrocutions has topped the charts for being the most prominent cause, sadly, of fatals. Chris, you've been involved, as you say, with IPAF for many years. For the first time, having seen these reporting fatal statistics and electrocutions being identified as the highest cause, what can industry do now to reduce these tragic incidents?
I think one of the things we have to look where they're happening. There's certain countries that there's no fatalities from overhead cables and electrocutions, and predominantly there's some countries where the majority of reports are coming from. But it's mainly, again, in uncontrolled areas, when people are away from construction sites, are controlled and fairly have good safety regimes in place. It's when we get out onto kind of trimming hedges, trimming trees, or just raising a boom or a scissor lift up in the air without first having checked above us. So it's being very careful and being aware of our surroundings every time we go up, and following set procedures to help make sure that we're aware of wires. There's guidance out there about the minimum safe distance we should keep away from those overhead cables, but we shouldn't use that as the true distance. We should stay further away if possible.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Now, Mark, I'm kind of really sort of aware that you not only operate in the UK, but you also have oversight over other parts of the world. To elaborate on Chris's view there in terms of the countries that we know that electrocutions are happening, we can see certainly that we have the US is the bulk of the reports. What views would you have that in terms of taking essentially data that we've got for the UK and standards that we've got for the UK and guidance and taking that to the US? What would your views be on that?
I think, it goes back to what Chris really talked about. We know, particularly in the US, a lot of the incidents from the data that we can see that's being reported on the portal, that they're happening outside of what you class as a fixed site. They're happening alongside the highway, in agriculture, and also in arboricultural environments. And it comes down to awareness campaigns, making sure that people that are using machines and equipment and the hirers are aware of the risks associated with electricity, and are checking that, for instance, telecommunication cables are not being confused with power cables. Yeah. So, there's a range of activities that I think hire companies can do to support their customers. And I know, there's campaigns that we've run through IPAF overseas across the world to highlight some of those risks. So I think you can come at it from both sides.
Okay, so I think for sure, from an International Safety Committee perspective, there are certainly, things that we can look at in terms of globally, instead of just having sort of guidance for countries. We may be able to look at some general guidance, which will then help users around the world and around the globe. Okay, great. Okay, we're now going to move on to falls from platform, which, as I mentioned earlier, is still the rolling 5-year average high, but for 19 and 20, it moved into second place. They are still the highest cause of significant injury and death, because we do have a huge amount of injuries in the industry when people fall and, unfortunately suffer life-changing injuries. Alana, can I ask you, what do you feel are the main factors potentially that influence this? Why are we having still so many falls on the platform?
I think there's 2 or 3 things that really contribute to this significantly. Harness and restraint lanyard and clipping on and boom type mutes is still not robustly mandated across the world. It is in certain countries. Obviously, it's mandated here in the UK. We do get people unclipping and standing on the guardrails to gain extra height because they've not potentially selected the right mute for the job, or they can't get close enough due to other obstructions on construction site, for instance. Sometimes they push the mute outside its limits and cause the basket to tip, and then they will fall out of the basket due to operating the mute outside its safety parameters.
Okay, thank you, Alana. So Alana touched on a good point there. Mark, from your experience in both industry and the rental sector, what do you generally see as the immediate and underlying causation that people should be aware of and consider when working at height to prevent falls from the platform?
Yeah, so if we look at the immediate cause, and this goes back to reviewing the data that all of us on presenting today have seen, it's clear that there's a number of key indicators there. Operators unfortunately can get catapulted from the machines. A small deviation in the ground can make a big difference in the platform, particularly on boom type mutes when they're being driven. So I think there's a lack of awareness of that with some users in certain parts of the world. Being hit by something, when you're on a construction site and you're close to other plant movement, or you're in a public area and you're close to road-going vehicles. And as Alana said there, overreaching from the platform, is one of the immediate causes. If you look at the sort of underlying causes, you've got, incorrect mute for the job. You just can't get to the position you need to be, so people then climb on the handrails or even the toe board. The centre of gravity moves beyond, the platform, and they can overbalance and fall out. And I think, a failure to provide harnesses in some parts of the world, and then where harnesses are pretty much mandated and well known and used, it's getting the operators to wear them and wear them correctly, so they can't get to a position where they can fall from the machine.
Okay, that's great. Chris, you've many years of experience in terms of, instructing, operating. You've been on both sides of the fence. You've been, represented IPAF for many years. What do you believe contractors and users should focus on then to address falls from the platform? We've had some real great information from both Alana and Mark there. What should contractors and users listening here today focus on?
I think one of the things we need to focus on is we mandate it in certain countries that they should wear harnesses and have them attached on, but there's still a lot of ignorance and complacency out there, and there's a lot of people who think, well, it won't happen to me, or it hasn't happened to me in the past, so why should it? It's not going to happen to me. Interestingly, when we in the days of when we used to have trade shows, if you were around the trade shows when they were setting up, the number of people who would be riding around on booms, unloading and unloading, and they weren't wearing a harness. So if the rental companies, if the manufacturers aren't leading by example, then the rest aren't going to follow. So I think we have to have this kind of start to rigidly enforce and not just stand by and point and say, look, he's not wearing a harness, but step up and start saying, stop, are you aware of the risk, and make sure you wear a harness whenever you're in a boom of any type. So to get rid of, to try and eradicate this ignorance and complacency of it won't happen to me. The other option is there's a revenue stream for rental companies. Why don't they offer the hire of harnesses or the sale of harnesses with the machines as well? Probably some already do. I know there's the issue with inspecting them and getting them back and managing that, but if that also promotes the kind of the wearing of them and raises the awareness, then it's another great step to reducing the falls, because basically all these falls, if someone had been attached, as you see from many of the YouTube video clips, if they'd been attached on, they wouldn't have hit the ground, and they may have suffered injuries, but they may have still been alive. So it's vital that people attach on.
Yeah, it's a great point, that, Chris, great point. I think also as well for me is, and certainly touching on what Alana said, what Mark said, and clearly what you've just said as well, Chris, is planning. We seem to have, this ability to sometimes not plan. So falls from the platform, for example, could be eradicated by having some type of assessment carried out to establish the right type of machine, MUP, to get that out. What's your views on that, Mark?
Yeah, I think, planning, when people read the report, they'll see that planning rolls all the way through. My experience, and this goes back to prior to working for a rental company in construction, people think about work at height and undertake a risk assessment, and their risk assessment can quite often end with use a MUP. It doesn't then go on to look at the risks associated with that MUP, and that's ground, that's the right machine, that's the training, competence, supervision, all of those sort of things. So planning absolutely is critical moving forward.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Okay, now I'm just going to move on to certainly a sector in terms of the incident, which was entrapment. Now, entrapment, for those of you who are listening here today, this is where somebody is typically caught between the platform and another structure. Often they are forced over the control panels, but also can be forced over the guardrails too. Now, Mark, from your experience in industry and the rental sector, why do you feel that trapping and crushing still remains a problem in our industry today? Are we doing enough?
No, I think, certain countries are getting better, without a doubt. And, there's been a lot of work done by IPAF and regulators and businesses in a number of countries, but I think there's still more that we can do. I think, when you're using a MUP because you need to get close to something to do an activity. And I think there's still a lack of awareness around operators understanding that, they can get themselves trapped.
Okay, Alana, so Mark's put some really good information there. Where do you see signs of improvement and why in entrapment? Do you see any signs of improvement in your rental business?
I think I have seen signs of improvement. If I go back to when I was in the construction industry in a previous life as well, and having dealt with entrapment incidents, there's definitely signs of improvement around awareness and understanding. A lot of the rental companies have worked with a number of different businesses across the globe to help with IPAF to upskill the end users and help them understand where the risks lie in terms of entrapment. So people are more informed. I think training for people that are planning MUP operations has improved somewhat over the years. Obviously, there's the IPAF MUPs for Managers course. We've got the PAL Plus course, which helps us train advanced operators that are then more aware of the entrapment issues and other issues in terms of operating a MUP. So I think, there has been a vast improvement, but we've still got a long way to go.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you're right. And you've touched on some really great things there in terms of mute managers and PAL Plus. And again, if you think also too as well, roundabout planning for the job, and this is planning to identify, potentially trapping and crushing areas, which is probably easier said than done from us sat here today discussing it. But when you're out at the coalface, there's all sorts of areas that potentially could be trapping and crushing. Chris, can I ask you, what more do you think can be done to reduce the risks of trapping and crushing? We see a really great amount of secondary guarding devices fitted to typically machines in the UK and other countries. Are we getting this out into the industry enough?
Oh, secondary guarding. I think we could have a webinar just on secondary guarding, Brian. My personal view is secondary guarding is one solution, but it is not the solution. Depends on where you identify that entrapment hazard, and when you actually drill down into the stats, it doesn't always happen when the person's actually going up to a workplace. It may be that the machine is being driven around the site, being collected by a delivery driver, and that they're reversing, and there's a cross member across, and there's lots of different places where entrapment happens, and secondary guarding devices can help in some. Sadly, there was, I think within the last 2 years, that there has been a fatality even with a secondary guarding device fitted. So it's not necessarily a panacea, that, and yes, they have their place, but not one device is suitable for all different situations. Where I kind of, looking back on my time when I was an IPAF instructor, one of the things that I distinctly remember, when you used to have candidates in the basket and you used to say, kind of, right, now elevate the platform, and they used to grab hold of the controller and then go, oh, that's the wrong way, and then they used to move it, or they used to push it fully forward or fully back to start with, and it's using controls proportionally, so easing them in. When you're driving a car, you don't accelerate full speed straight away. You gradually increase your speed. So use the proportional controls. And also the other key thing is familiarization with the particular machine. So you know when you move the control to the left, you're going to go to the left or go to the right. There's a great piece of work which started way back in 2005-06, which has come to fruition in the last year, and that is a standard ISO 21455, which is the start of standardization of control, function, and layout, and that will take over the next 10-15 years before it has its full effect and filters into every design standard, whether it be in the kind of Australia, America, China, or Europe, or wherever it be. Hopefully standard setters will adopt that 21455 as a mandatory standard for controls, so we will start then to get controls of a very similar layout. So for me, it's proportional controls, familiarization and standardization of controls, as well as the secondary guarding devices.
Thank you, Chris. I have carried out other webinars for other regions, and I have seen secondary guarding devices that have been designed by operators and management on site to try and mitigate the trapping and crushing effect. I suppose my question is now to Mark, is secondary guarding being used enough around the world? Does it need to be used? Are we seeing enough devices in other parts of the world to help reduce this incident criteria?
Yeah, I think certainly when you look at the countries that are using secondary guarding devices, and as Chris said, I think it's really important that we don't just focus on that as an entire solution, because it's a tool in the box. But I think you can see that progress has been made. It's difficult to know whether the progress is because secondary guarding devices exist, or they exist alongside better training, better awareness, and better management and better planning. So it's hard to be able to pick that apart, but certainly they do have a part to play. I would say though that you know, anybody who's considered or considering designing their own secondary guarding device, please don't. You know, it's a specialist piece of equipment that needs a specialist engineering assessment to understand whether you're actually going to increase the risk as opposed to decrease the risk. So certainly, you know, they've definitely got their place. You can see that in countries that are using them, the accidents around particularly fatals is reducing, but you know, you need to take account of everything else that Alana and Chris has mentioned.
Great, that's brilliant, thank you. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the last two categories, which were mutes which had been struck by vehicles or machines, or also potentially being struck by falling objects. Alana, you work in a rental company which has multifacets of different types of equipment. And for sure, I know that you have your truck mounted type machines that are out there every day. Why do you think we are still experiencing mutes being struck by other vehicles or machines?
I think it's a number of different reasons, and a lot of it comes down to planning and risk assessment again, Brian. You know, for instance, we regularly have specialist vehicles, truck mounts out on the public highway. It's making sure that we have traffic management around those vehicles to protect them and to highlight to other road users that you have that machine on the public highway. You know, if we think about live traffic situations, again, on high-speed roads, we quite often can be driving down the motorway and see roadworks at the side of the road. They do have concrete barriers in place, but you could have a boom operator not realise that the knuckle of the boom is actually sticking out into the live traffic. It's situations like that. It's impatient third parties waiting for a machine to move. And then also there's the segregation of machines that are working together on a site that hasn't been done adequately, and one might not notice the other and strike the other machine.
Yeah, no, that's great. In terms of machines that you have working on the continent with with the Loxam, what other procedures in place do Loxam take for their operators that work in, you know, on the autobahns and some of the roads in rural sort of Belgium and France? Because we would kind of say that's completely different to what we would see in the UK. How would it be conducted over there?
In all fairness, I'd have to come back to you about that, Brian,
Okay.
and double check and come back to you.
That's fine, that's fine. Mark, in terms of mutes being struck by vehicles and machines, what measures need to be undertaken by users to prevent these incidents from occurring? Because it's not always what we just see is like the vehicle mounted, as Alana quite rightly pointed out there. Often there are mobile type machines that are struck by vehicles out there. So what measures need to be undertaken?
Yeah, okay. So I think Alana made a very good point around the tail swing on booms in particular. But as you say, the statistics show us that it's not just, you know, truck mounted and van mounted equipment. So I think, again, I don't want to keep saying planning, but planning, you know, making sure that you've got an exclusion zone. I think it's, and this may come as a bit of a surprise, that a number of the incidents on the public highway are actually involving load and unload, not necessarily in this category, but maybe in one of the others. So you need to assess the site, you need to assess where you're going to be working, what you're going to be doing, making sure you've got exclusion zones in place. Working in public areas typically may move from one position to another. Make sure you reassess the situation throughout the duration of the task, the day and the week. And I think, you know, if you do that, then you will be in a better position than you would otherwise.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. And my final question now is going to be to Chris. Before we move on to the questions that are already coming, because I can see some questions coming in from our viewers today. Mute's been struck by falling objects. Now, this suggests work's being carried out above the mute. In your experience, Chris, over the many years that you've worked in this industry, what are those works, and how can we avoid this, terrible occurrence happening where things land on top of a platform?
It's not just things landing on top of a platform. It's when they're up in the air and a crane swings round and hits the platform or the occupants of the platform. A gantry crane comes along and hits the platform. Arboriculturists cutting branches and it falls and they haven't actually thought how the consequences of the fall, and it lands on them. Demolition is another one. So again, it's back down to the planning and just taking a step back before you do anything and thinking it through. And I've kind of just been thinking. I've got a few notes up here while everybody's been talking, and the key thing keeps coming back to planning. But if before someone started a job, the operator and the person who's planning it, if they stood back and they said, what can I do to prevent fall from height? What can I do to prevent electrocution? What can I do to prevent entrapment, overturn, being hit by a vehicle or being hit by falling objects? Or are there any risks of those while I'm about to do before I do my job? And look at whatever hazards there are around those 6 key points that we've just talked kind of in fair bit of detail about. That would be a far better exercise than filling in 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces of paper and then putting a risk assessment down, which is never used again. So I think there's some key areas around practical planning rather than paperwork planning.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think, the practicalities of doing that exercise may bore on quite a lot of information about how the process and the planning and the selection of the equipment. Yep. So I think you're absolutely right. Prior to registration for the webinar, we did get some questions come in. So I'm going to take these first, just because I think it's important that we discuss these. And then what we'll then do is move on to the questions that are coming in on the Q&A, and hopefully we can get through there today. Okay, the first question, I'm going to ask Mark this, and then open it up to the rest of the panel. Does the panel have a consensus on best practice or procedure when an operator leaves the basket whilst the platform is elevated? Mark, what's your views on this?
Yeah, so this one over the years is always quite contentious. So the general view is don't leave the platform, unless you've undertaken a very robust risk assessment. And I think we have to recognise that sometimes, that is an acceptable method, but it has to be, the exception and not the rule. Mutes aren't designed to replace a goods hoist or a lift. And you shouldn't be climbing out because it's easier to do that than use a set of stairs. So that would be my take, Brian.
Thank you, Mark. Alana, have you got anything else that you wish to add to that?
I don't. I've experienced operators and users want to do that over the years, and it's certainly something that only in exceptional circumstances has been permitted, and there's been a very robust risk assessment in place, but ideally we'd want to avoid it at all costs.
Thank you, Alana. And lastly, Chris, your views on this?
Yeah, there is clear guidance in international standards as to when you can do it and what you have to put in place before you do it. As Mark has already said, the mutes aren't designed to be exiting at height. They're designed for getting in and out of the platform at ground level. But in exceptional circumstances, there are measures that can be put in place to make sure it's exiting at height is done safely. So I would suggest people refer to the relevant international standards and follow the guidance therein.
Thank you, Chris. Question for Alana. Operating over uneven surfaces is a challenge. Which is the best recommended full body harness? Now, it doesn't say what type of mute there is. It's just saying what is the best recommended full body harness. We don't talk about brands, so just yeah.
I think you've got to make an assessment based on the wearer and the environment that you're working in, and then obviously the first port of call has always got to be a restraint lanyard, and only again in exceptional circumstances would you use full arrest lanyard. You should always go for full restraint if you can.
Okay, thank you, Alana. Mark, have you got any views?
If you're talking the type of harness, I would say user acceptance is important. So leaving brands aside, it needs to be comfortable. And if you're asking a user to wear a harness all day, don't go for the cheapest one you could possibly find. You know, you want to go for one that your operator is comfortable to wear. And as Alana said, a full body harness, you know, restraint ideally, you know, but you want to make sure that the user, you know, is going to wear it, and importantly, not only wear it, but clip on, you know, to the anchor points in the basket.
Now, IPAF years ago released the H1 statement, and the H1 statement available on the IPAF website recommends the use of a full body harness with an adjustable restraint lanyard for boom type platforms, but for verticals it's not normally recommended. Have you any views on that? Is that guidance still right? Have we seen any incidents involving vertical type machines where a harness perhaps would have stopped?
Yeah, so I think certainly, and we've talked about this in the committee, that there are a number of falls from vertical lifts, and I think, you know, the statements as a general principle is okay, but it's worth a review to understand, you know, can we determine the circumstances around those falls, and would a harness and lanyard have prevented them? The reason why it's generally accepted for a boom is because of the catapult effect, you know, which you don't generally get on a vertical lift. So, but Chris, you've been in IPAF and industry. What are your views on this?
You two make me sound like an old veteran, kind of pensioning me off. It's interesting. Some countries talk of or use or prefer an inertia reel lanyard, one that is extends out, but then has an inertia, so it locks when there's a sudden movement put on it. And there are certain ones of those that are now in the marketplace designed for mupes. So maybe there's a possibility some of that type could be considered in certain scissor lifts, and the other thing would be, I would suggest, if you start to analyze the data around scissor lifts, is it's more than likely when the mupe is being traversed across ground, maybe there's you know, the thought that possibly if you're traveling in a mupe, you should be attached. And then once you get to your place of work in verticals, you may be, because there's not the catapult effect, it may be possible to unattach, because you've still got the guardrails and things like that. But it would be down to individual sites and individual cases and the tasks that are being carried out. Brilliant.
Okay, that's great. And for certain, we're not picking you off just yet, Chris, so you're absolutely fine there in that sense. Okay, I'm conscious there's quite a few questions coming in, and I think what we'll do now is we'll take some of these questions. I don't know, I presume, guys and lady and gents, you can see these questions, but the first question I'm going to take there is from Jim Waldron. When thinking about trends, the data appears raw and not normalized. Is this right? So, for example, when measuring cultural safety, incidents and fatalities per unit measure would be a better indicator. Normalized based on quantity of units sold into countries, for example, or if we know the split of use across the averages versus construction may be harder. Is this being looked at? Mark, as chair of the International Safety Committee, I think this is one for your good self.
Okay. So yes, in effect, we're trying to work out, Jim, how best to do that so we can get the most accurate way of portraying it. And we've talked around, could we do it via hire days, via working hours, or via machines sold into a particular market. So, you know, I think we're on a journey. This is part of that journey to determine which is the best way that we can represent this moving forward.
Brilliant, thank you, Mark. Okay, we've got a question from Abdullah Tucker. Has the pandemic period affected the accidents? Alana, what's your views on this?
I think it's certainly affected the numbers during the initial stages of the pandemic, because most of the countries had a period of shutdown whilst they worked out what control measures we needed to put in place to keep our people safe in terms of the pandemic itself. So I think, yes, it probably has decreased the number of incidents that we had during 2020, at the very least, certainly, you know, February, March, April time.
Okay, and I think I would concur with that we did see a drop in accident reports over that period, which is, again, you know, the whole world has virtually stopped in that sense in some respects, hasn't it? So, okay, thank you for that, Alana. Question now for you, Chris. Do you support the inclusion of a lanyard attachment warning monitoring system, such as the Fasten tracker system, to help reduce accidental falls by lift operators?
Anything that encourages people to attach to the designated anchor point when they're in an access platform, in a boom, it has got to be in some way a good means of improving safety. I've long been an advocate of something similar to the devices that you have in your car when you click your seatbelt. If you don't click your seatbelt in, you get an annoying buzzer that keeps on going and reminds you to do it. So it's far easier just to clip it in. It's not quite as simple as that with MUPs. But even the seatbelt system and mandatory wearing of seatbelts kind of took 30, 40 years to come into play, and the number of cars. So yes, a system like that should be encouraged. And I'm sure as time goes on, we will get systems in place there where unless you're locked into your boom, you'll get a warning note symbol or something, but it'll come, it'll evolve as MUPs evolve.
Thank you, Chris. Mark, question from Danal. Is it necessary to always have a banksman stroke flagman for a MUP? If yes, is it okay to stay idle inside the bucket in the elevated position if the banksman is busy with other tasks temporarily? So talking around banksmen and flagmen. Ladies.
Yeah, so I guess banksman means different things in different countries. So, you know, if you've got a ground spotter or somebody who's there in terms of rescue, should that be necessary, then, you know, depending on the circumstances, that is definitely something we would recommend. In terms of a banksman or a spotter to be able to control the works, you know, that can be quite difficult because, you know, booms and scissors can be very large and people in the platform can be a long way from the ground. So if you're looking at it for traffic movement, then that would be another slightly different scenario. So I guess it's down to the situation that you find on your site, but having somebody there to effect a rescue is definitely a recommendation.
Question for Alana here, and this is from Connie Horton. Is the access portal, so that presume the reported accident portal, voluntary?
If you're an IPAF member in the UK, it's mandatory. I think we have had it mandated in a couple of other countries over the last couple of months. Correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but it's not mandatory for IPAF membership across the world.
Yeah, these are the questions coming. You're not on test today, but you're quite correct insofar as the fact that it's mandated in the UK, but it is voluntary around the world. And, you know, again, one of the things that I would really sort of push you to have a look at is the new portal, which was launched in September 2020. It's more streamlined, it's much easier of use. And of course, now in the UK, you can report your incidents via the EPAL app as well, of which we are now receiving incident data via the EPAL. Okay, question for you, Chris, and this is from an anonymous question. Will a one-size-fits-all control come into the new harmonization of standards?
No, there's still got to be enough leeway, and the standard, the standard I talked about, ISO 21455, which is about control design and layout, has enough not wriggle room, but it has enough variance within it to standardize controls, but not limit control design and limit innovation, because each of the manufacturers wants unique selling points and wants to kind of progress and with innovations, and making it very, very limited, the design would hinder that, and in the long run would hinder safety, I believe. Can I just say as well, Brian, that kind of all the accidents that we've analysed, we've put them into 6 different slots, but each one has got multiple causational factors to consider, and it's well worth remembering that no one, when they're using a mute, goes out there to have an accident, and it's just unfortunately that the holes in the cheese seem to line up when accidents happen. So again, going back to the planning is essential, and training helps along with that.
I agree, yeah. One of the questions that's come in there is, and it's from anonymous again, do you have any figures that show how many deaths or injuries have occurred due to head injuries? Well, the answer to that is yes, we do. We discuss the type of injury, but we also discuss as well the body part where the injury occurred, which was on the report. I didn't show that earlier because, you know, to be fair, I wanted you to see the reports on there for what they were, for what we were focusing on there. I've also got a question here from Harry Eames. And he says, are the reports generated by the IPAF portal available to end users as well as hire companies? Mark, what's your views on this?
So the worldwide report, afternoon, Harry, first of all, the worldwide report will be available to everybody. The information on the portal is, if it's your information for your business, you can see all of that. The committee has a anomalized version of that, so we don't see, you know, the company involved or the names. We just see the incidents, and you know, it's our job to make sense of that and to produce some reports. There's more work to be done, and I think, you know, as we move through this year into next year, the number, the types of reports and the content will evolve.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you very much, Mark. And all I would say is that there is a contractor category of which people can become an IPAF member, and that would certainly give you access to the reports yourselves, and you could build up your own picture of your own, with your own portal through the IPAF accident portal. So I'm just going to share my screen now, and hopefully this is coming through. Can you all see that screen?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. But to summarise, then, I'm just conscious of time. Mutes are still acknowledged to be one of the safest means of carrying out temporary work at height, and all these incidents that we've talked today, and as Chris rightly said, there's many causations there. We believe were preventable, but I think, as Mark alluded to earlier, and certainly Alana from with their businesses, planning is key in most of the things we do. And let's not forget to plan for safe muse or mast climbing or hoist use. Remember, you can all help us to make it even safer by reporting your incidents and accidents to IPAF. Your data is safe, it's confidential, and as mentioned earlier, it's anonymized. So nobody will see any name of any businesses or equipment. I suppose we've mentioned earlier, but let's not forget about training. There's some great courses out there that IPAF do. You know, so we've got the starting your your role as an operator or mass climbing work platform operator. We've got mutual management training courses that are out there available. And of course, we've got one of the latest courses, which is site assessment for mute selection training course, which really does help and hone in on the planning and the selection of the equipment. So we've done the Q&A. I just changed a little bit earlier because we were getting too many, quite a few questions coming in. So we've come to the end of the webinar now. I hope you found this useful and thought-provoking. This leads me to thank our exclusive sponsors today, Xenoboom, for sponsoring the webinar, and of course, a big thanks to our panel of speakers, Mark, Alana, and Chris, which we certainly made it very interesting and thought-provoking. And lastly, thank you to yourselves for taking the time and listening to the webinar. You will see in a second, if the magic works, there will be a final poll. I think it's just come on right in the middle of my screen. And all I will say now is a link to the latest IPAF Global Safety Report will be emailed, we believe, to you tomorrow. I hope you enjoy reading it, and hopefully it can, if you've got any questions, please feel free to get in touch. Thank you very much and take care.